ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Țărul pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. E pentru că pe lume partidul s-a dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a самых окраин, с южных гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
нам башмаки без оплат. И нас не согреет треск речей под барабанный раскат. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы, извините, что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Modern Platz in der Welt ist. Rein dir ein in der Arbeit, der Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rein dir ein in der Arbeit, der Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Pod słońcem rasti jasna dzieci, rasti i cvjetaj zemljo radnih ljudi i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napuči i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije новостях в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Hello, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 4th of January 2026, and what a start to the year we have. We are coming to you live on YouTube, on Twitch, Rumble, X, and Substack. So be sure to like and share the stream, and be sure to subscribe to us on all of the appropriate channels, etc. So we are here today principally to do a follow-up show on yesterday's astounding revelations regarding the apparent kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. Well, the kidnapping was very real. The circumstances behind it are still very unclear as of yet. And Maduro recently arrived in New York and was put through a completely bizarre convoy in New York that was televised on American television, including like the van he was traveling in, rolling around New York streets with open doors. So I'm just going to share that particular video because it's so strange and really just sums up what Trump's own motivations here are with regard to this particular event. So I'm going to just share this with you so you can all take a look at this weirdness and go ahead and play it.
Good job, good job! USA! USA!
Right, so I hope you all caught that, including the collection of fascistic morons trailing behind the motorcade chanting USA. So the question of what happened, again, we still have no idea really exactly how they got hold of Maduro, why they were able to get in and out in very slow moving, apparently Chinook helicopters, and no one fired a shot at them. There has been various different pieces of speculation over the past day or so, but nothing concrete. Trump, of course, gave his press conference yesterday where he claimed victory and said that I've spoken to the vice president. She's going to do what we want. That, of course, is rather unclear, given that the now acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, is apparently still committed to the Chavismo program and has denounced the kidnapping in forceful terms. Again, we don't know how the U.S. did manage to do what it did yesterday, who was compromised within the Venezuelan security system, whether this was all part of some elaborate deal that Trump and his people have struck with the Venezuelans. That certainly seems to be the most likely outcome, most likely scenario here. But what we're going to do today is go through a few things related to the legal case and also the response globally that has been forthcoming about this this piece of what can only be described as gangsterism from the Trump administration. Now, what I want to talk about first is the response from social democrats and Trotskyites and people like that who will prefix any denunciation of this move by Trump, this abduction, by saying, "Oh well, I didn't approve of Chavez, I didn't approve of Maduro, I didn't approve of the system there. The last election was rigged, etc., etc." If you're going to say that and then follow it up with, "But I didn't approve of, his being lifted in the night and illegally, not that legality means anything, but illegally transported to the United States." If you're going to agree with all of the imperialist propaganda about Maduro and about Chavez and about the Bolivarian Revolution, then your denunciation of Trump as having broken the law means absolutely nothing. It means nothing because by confirming all of the propaganda of imperialism, you've basically just made their case for their actions for them. Many of us who've been around a little while now, I first got politically active all the way back in 1999 over the Kosovo War. Many of us remember how the anti-war movement in 1999 was completely hamstrung by this Trotskyite nonsense of saying, well, Milosevic is a red-brown dictator, he's a Serb fascist, he's a gangster, he's committing genocide. So they would agree with the entire NATO case against Milosevic, and then at the end they'd say, oh well, but we don't approve of the bombing campaign. So, well, if you're not going to contest the terms upon which imperialism builds its case, then what value is your supposed anti-war stance? If you're going to reinforce all of the propaganda about Milosevic, about Saddam Hussein, about Gaddafi, about Bashar al-Assad, then really all you're doing is amplifying imperialism, but you're giving it a left face. You're giving it a left tinge, so to speak. And the job of those of us who live in the imperial core nations isn't to go around echoing the propaganda of the ruling classes here. It's to staunchly oppose the operations run by imperialism against countries that are besieged because they refuse to follow along with or be dictated to by Washington, London, Paris, and Berlin. You see this all the time you saw it, as I said, with regard to the Kosovo war. It made effective anti-war work basically impossible. Same with the Iraq war, same with the occupation of Afghanistan, same with as I said, the proxy war against Libya and against Syria. The idea that these clowns have that they're going to basically secure themselves morally by saying, well, I hate Saddam Hussein, I hate Gaddafi, or the Assad regime is a horrible dictatorship. By agreeing with all of that, again, they make effective anti-war work impossible, because you have to be able to, in a strong fashion, say that the case made by imperialism for its interventions is based on complete and utter lies, which they always are, and that we call for the defeat of imperialism. We call for the defeat of the imperialist forces in Syria, for instance. We should have been all very clear about calling for the defeat of the dollar jihadists and their backers in Washington, Ankara, Tel Aviv, and London. We should have been absolutely clear in backing the Libyan government in their war to defend their country against, again, the same dollar jihadists hired by London, Washington, and Paris. But again, every single time this comes up in the anti-war movement in Britain, you get these Trotskyite clowns doing the work of imperialism for it and refusing to focus on the major issue, and spending all of their time tying themselves up in knots so they can still feel comfortable talking to their Guardian reading fuckwit friends and relatives. So this is, again, happened with regard to the situation with Maduro. People saying, I didn't approve of Chavez, or Maduro's elections illegitimate, basically taking the same line as Keir Starmer. This is what the Scottish National Party did up here in Scotland. This is what the so-called Radical Independence Party, the leadership of the Alba Party, Kenny McCaskill, did. This is what most of the Trotskyite organizations have done. And this is, again, this is why you don't have effective anti-war, anti-imperialism work being done in the imperial core nations, because all of the left organizations that are supposed to organize that or be part of it are essentially social chauvinist organizations who echo ruling class propaganda and refuse to actually stick their chins out and say, no, we reject this. We reject the lies. We defend the achievements of the Bolivarian revolutionary process. We defend the right of the Venezuelan working class and peasantry to defend their country against U.S. imperialist intervention. And we make absolutely no bones about the fact that we call for the release of Maduro and his return to Venezuela. Now, of course, that's very unlikely to happen at the moment, but we call for it anyway. And you should think very carefully before echoing the propaganda put out there by imperialism. Now, there was a question in the comments about, well, why can't we have critiques of this, that, or the other? You can have critiques of anything, truth be told. You can have a critique of like the pink-tide governments. We certainly do here. But what we don't do here is repeat the nonsense that comes out of the imperialist propaganda networks. we don't repeat the nonsense about Maduro being illegitimate, which is, by the way, in the indictment that we'll come to in just a moment, is the US just repeats all of its baseless assertions about unfair elections and puts in its indictment the constitutional changes that created the Constituent Assembly. So those who go along with this, those who say, oh, Maduro, Chavez, anti-democratic, blah, 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 you are actually echoing the very language and the charges the US uses in its own indictment of Maduro. You are a disgrace, and you are actively helping imperialism, and you should seriously reconsider your political outlook if this is what you have been doing. So we will get on now to the question of the indictment itself. Now, what the US has done here is something quite interesting, and they've been doing it more and more over the past 20 years, which is that they have been asserting that US law covers essentially the entire planet on the grounds usually of self-defense and national security. Now, this was, of course, something that the Bush administration started doing, but it really started to grow under the Obama administration. And of course, Trump took it even further. Biden took it further. Then Trump took it further again. Now, how can, many will legitimately ask, the US government claim to have jurisdiction over Venezuela? What, given that Nicolas Maduro has seldom visited the United States and has no business interests there, as far as I know, and the charges against him are all based upon his actions as Venezuelan president, Venezuelan vice president, Venezuelan foreign minister, and member of the Venezuelan National Assembly. How on earth can the United States, specifically a court in New York City, have a jurisdictional claim over the activities of a foreign government? Well, one of the things that the US is claiming, that the Maduro is engaged in drug trafficking with this entity called the Cartel of the Suns, and that this constituted an attack on the United States itself, triggering the right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Now, this, of course, is, shall we say, a generous interpretation, to say the very least, or shall we say, a rather elastic interpretation, and is something which is, of course, so roundly rejected by any lawyers with half a clue. Now, the other thing that the US is claiming is that, of course, because these drug cartels do business inside the United States, they can charge the people involved with these cartels under US laws. Of course, drug trafficking is not an armed attack under most definitions of international law. And this is, of course, a flimsy excuse to try and conduct a regime change operation. I mean, this has a long history behind it, including going all the way back to 1989 with the U.S. invasion of Panama and their detention of Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega, though, for instance, was a genuine drug trafficker. He was a drug trafficker who was the CIA's point man with regard to narcotics operations in Central America for many, many years. It was only when he decided to make overtures to the Cuban government and started to show the potential of going rogue that the US suddenly decided that it was time to bring in the drug charges against him. So, interestingly enough, the US has been using the capture of Noriega in 1989 as a precedent for bringing these charges against Maduro. But the Noriega case was condemned at the time, and the US's rationale for it and the US's justification for it was based on the actions of and the endorsement of the invasion and the abduction of Noriega by the post-invasion government, a government that, of course, the US installed. So this is the usual made-up nonsense from the United States, and it tells us yet again that they are making it up as they go along, that there's very little actual law involved here, that essentially what the rules-based order is whatever the fuck the US decides it is. And the charges against Maduro are manufactured. Now, to go back to the point about the cartel of the Suns. Now, if you'll just excuse me 1 minute, I have to go and handle a wildly barking dog, so I'll return to you in about 5 minutes. Just a moment. Right, so just to continue the examination here, the cartel of the Suns, according to work done by the American journalist Max Blumenthal, was actually a U.S. intelligence-aligned operation. So the allegation that this was something that Maduro was involved in is, frankly, a joke. This is made-up nonsense. And if you look through the indictment, there's a whole lot of absolute garbage in there, including the fact that they never specify what the amount of cocaine allegedly imported by Maduro's drug trafficking operation to the United States actually was. They complain at one point that the cocaine shipped into the United States was of very low quality. So that this part of the indictment reads, during this time, Maduro Guerra spoke, this is two defendants, Maduro Guerra is Nicolas Maduro's son, spoke with his drug trafficking partners about, among other things, shipping low quality cocaine to New York because it could not be sold in Miami. So this is rather hilarious, to say the least. Evidently, whoever wrote this had the quality level of New York cocaine versus Miami cocaine weighing heavily on his mind. So the other point about it, one of the other things he's charged with is possession of machine guns. Now, it does raise under a Firearms Act passed by the federal government in the 1930s. So quite how you can charge a foreign head of state with possession of a machine gun under U.S. law, that's going to take a hell of a lot of very twisted legal arguments to try and prove that. So the other interesting points here are that they've charged Maduro with a foreign terrorist entity called the Zetas, but these weren't even designated as a terrorist entity until last year, 2025. Some of the charges relate to the usage of, basically Venezuelan diplomats engaged in diplomatic activity in Mexico. So again, there's no really plausible jurisdictional claim there for the United States. And the other complaints are about the Venezuelans transporting what on private planes, what the US alleges were large drug shipments inside Venezuela. And the other complaints in there relates to, well, there's several, but one of the most hilarious is the US's continual whinging about the setting up of the Constituent Assembly several years ago. Now, if you'll recall, what this was an attempt by, I think it was under Chavez, to actually bypass the comprador-dominated National Assembly by creating, in actual fact, a more democratic assembly that more properly represented Venezuelan workers and peasants. And the US actually includes whinging about that in the indictment. So it's not related to any charge, but they go on about it for quite some time. So a completely flimsy indictment based on total fictions, which comes to brings us to the question of well, given that a lot of this is just totally made up, like the stuff about Cartel of the Suns was the Cartel of the Suns, as again Max Blumenthal has stated, is far more related to operations done by the US intelligence services than anything involving Maduro or the Venezuelans. So are they really going to try and prove this in court? And as I said on the stream yesterday, that in my view, they not only can they not prove it, it will most likely fall apart if they try to, but I don't think they will. I think that what they will ultimately do is Maduro will appear in court basically to plead not guilty and confirm his name, and then they will lock him away and try and work out what the fuck to do with him. Because looking at this indictment, this is so ridiculous that any half decent lawyer in the United States would be able to actually argue this down, or argue that most of the charges should be thrown out, or almost all the charges should be thrown out, because there's no way the Trump administration can possibly prove any of this. They're just wild assertions. I mean, if it sounds familiar to a Tom Clancy book, that's because it is. If you recall, the Tom Clancy book and subsequent Harrison Ford movie, and again subsequent Amazon TV series based on the Jack Ryan character, the corrupt George H.W. Bush president, George H.W. Bush stand-in in Clancy's Clear and Present Danger, calls the cartels a clear and present danger to the national security of the United States. That was written like way back in the 80s. And it was made into the very good Harrison Ford movie, even if like totally mad and reactionary, of course. But then again, the even more reactionary TV series featuring the guy who played Jim in the American version of The Office. So this like nonsense has been rolling around for quite some time, designating drug cartels as foreign terrorist entities. But like other foreign terrorist entities, like such as Al Qaeda, in actual fact, these organizations always have far more to do with the United States than they do with the people who the US is alleging is collaborating with them. Just as if the US wants to bomb somewhere, they say Al Qaeda's present. Which actually means is that people working for the US, the British, the French, and other imperialist powers are present, and they're going to use that as a justification for invading, bombing, carrying out a coup, etc. The same is true with this like war on drugs shit. They're involved in drug trafficking. Well, we better invade. It's a narco-terrorist regime. There are actual narco-terrorist regimes. They're all aligned with the United States. I mean, take this, for example, the example of a former Honduran oligarchical president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who Trump just a month ago pardoned. And he was in charge of a racket that actually was transporting many thousands of tons of cocaine to the United States. But Trump, of course, pardoned him. Noboa, the oligarch clown that runs Ecuador, is implicated in drug trafficking operations. Most of the people in like Bukele, who's the clown fascist that runs El Salvador, is implicated in collaborating with drug trafficking operations. Go all the way back to the 80s, and you have the Nicaraguan Contras drug smuggling into the United States, and of course the CIA being intimately involved in that. These are accusations against Maduro, but these are actually confessions of real crimes. The United States alleges that that Venezuela under Maduro was essentially a corrupt narco state using the institutions of the state to shield drug traffickers. Well, that's exactly what the United States does and has always done. There's no doubting that anymore. I mean, this has been the case for well over 50 years. It was this way back in the Vietnam War. It's the case today. In fact, the unit that captured Maduro, the Delta Force unit, is written about recently by the American journalist Seth Harp. And they are heavily implicated in the in the trafficking of narcotics internationally, and that was one of their primary tasks during the war on terror operations, again, according to Seth Harp's reporting, which has not been disproven by anything the US government. But also, I'll point out this tweet from Seth Harp, which I think makes a good case, which says Maduro and Claudia Sheinbaum are two of the only leaders in Latin America not corrupted by cartels. Narco, i.e. Marco Rubio, wants them gone so that allies of his like Daniel Noboa, Alvaro Uribe, the former death squad leader and U.S. stooge who ran Colombia for a while, Juan Orlando Hernandez, Nayib Bukele, and Jose Antonio Cas can control the entire cocaine trade. And that's the reality of it. The actual truth is that the US, and with the assistance of the British, of course, is the center of the global narcotics trade, and has been for many, many decades. So to charge Maduro with being with using the institutions of the Venezuelan state to actually facilitate drug trafficking, well, that's exactly what the United States does. And it eliminates those leaders who don't go along with its drug trafficking operations. I mean, this is exactly why back in the day when Evo Morales first came to power in Bolivia, he chucked out the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, because the Drug Enforcement Agency is not about actually eliminating drug trafficking. It's about controlling it. And it's about enforcing that the US's chosen drug traffickers get to continue their business. Because first of all, it's an awful lot of money. Second of all, it's used to fund US, shall we say, ultra secret dark operations. And their partnership with or between narco trafficking, organized crime, and the US intelligence services, again, has been established over and over again by American journalists going back to the Vietnam period. So to charge Maduro with this is utterly fanciful nonsense. And the irony of having Maduro snatched by Delta Force, which is basically a gang operation, as Seth Harp has eloquently demonstrated in his book, is just supremely ironic. And so this so-called indictment is not fanciful nonsense. Maduro, if he has the right to a lawyer, supposedly, if he has a decent lawyer, they could stand the chance of at least exposing some of this in court. Now, this is why I say this will not be an open trial if it ever goes ahead. In fact, I have severe doubts whether the trial will ever go ahead. Because to try and prove this and to have people report on it, even in the United States media, would make the whole thing look as ridiculous and completely made up, which is what it is. So there will be no trial. There will be no trial. Maduro will be kept in prison until they've worked out what to do with him. My guess is, in the end, that they'll ultimately trade him off to the Chinese or the Russians in return for somebody else. That will ultimately be what they will do. But the indictment itself is completely ridiculous. And they will not, if they try and prove these things, it will just reveal how much bullshitting goes on when it comes to the US just making this stuff up. Now, the other point about this is that the other point about this case is to examine what is going on inside Venezuela itself. Now, so far, the government that is now led by Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has declared that Nicolas Maduro should be returned to Venezuela, and has declared that they will enact his decrees that he put into place just before he was seized by the United States. Now, it remains to be seen exactly what went on and who collaborated with the United States in seizing Maduro. And the truth about that will come out, I think, pretty quickly, and will become obvious pretty quickly, according to the actions of the Venezuelan government and the personnel within it. Now, Trump and Rubio Trump said in his press conference yesterday that Delcy Rodriguez, now the acting president, is going to do what we want. Now, is that correct? Well, that will only time will tell on that one. Or has Trump jumped the gun on this and ended up pulling off what looks like a spectacular operation, but in actual fact is a sort of a means by which Trump can extricate himself from a mess that he had created. Now, there's some reason to think that this is indeed what has happened, because what Trump favors when it comes to his decision making is not necessarily sound policy, shall we say, from the point of view of imperialism. Trump values more than anything else, like dramatic assertions of which give the appearance of great American power, which I think there is a strong case to be made that this is what this is. Trump favors dramatic language, like dramatic actions. We're going to blow the hell out of them. You're going to see. We're going to kill so many people. We're going to kill millions. That kind of thing. But in actual fact, flinches when it comes to the actual reality of his actions. So when it came to, for instance, the war on Iran, which of course the U.S. or certain sections of the U.S. The U.S. militarist clique had been pushing for decades, in fact, since 1979, and eventually the Israelis were assigned the task of leading on this. When it came to it, Trump, when he saw the plan put together by the U.S. and Israeli intelligence services and their militaries had not worked, he did some symbolic bombing and took his ball home, much like Cartman. When it came to this, Trump clearly thought that by blowing up some innocent fishermen and by staging this big display of U.S. military power, in actual fact, he had painted himself into a corner. And that the only move he had left, really, if the Venezuelans, if Maduro didn't just, hand himself over, was to invade the country or stage some kind of military action to try and trigger regime collapse. Now, the U.S. military leaders probably understood, maybe not the most senior level, but the more capable officers in the Pentagon probably knew that a full-blown invasion would not be possible to pull off, given the forces that the U.S. actually has available to it at the moment. And so their best option was to try and bribe their way out of the situation, to reach some kind of bargain that would enable Trump to go on TV and say, we won, we can do this to anybody, which is what he's been saying today. And this seems to be the only explanation that makes any sense, that some kind of deal was done with somebody inside the Venezuelan hierarchy. Whether Maduro himself knew about it, I don't know. But this is the only real explanation as to why two slow-moving American, apparently Chinook helicopters could fly into Caracas, even if Caracas had gone down under a blackout. The Venezuelan military still have access to night vision technology and can still detect air-based vehicles that are coming in, especially slow-moving ones like a helicopter. Then why was the only explanation as to why these were never fired on and why there was apparently no exchange of gunfire at all when they seized Maduro was that this had already been set up. And this was a transfer of power had either already been worked out or had been tacitly agreed. So the question then is, well, what happens in Venezuela itself? At the moment, what you've got is mass demonstrations on the streets demanding the return of Maduro. And you've had the PSUV issue a statement calling for people to get into the streets and mobilize. But quite who has done this deal with the US and quite what has been said will only become clear as time passes. And now Rubio, who you notice was in I put 12 versions of Rubio in the jury box for the AI generated thumbnail I used for this program. Now now Rubio said basically, even though they've got Maduro, basically he confirmed that the rest of the government remains in place and that they will need to, the US will want to see a complete change in policy. Now, you would have thought that the US would have had all of that worked out before they staged their little snatch event, shall we say, yesterday, their kidnapping event yesterday. But apparently they didn't. Apparently the US hadn't fully worked out what they were doing, which says that they were desperate to get out of the corner that they painted themselves into, that certain deals were made that involved, and apparently some of this was based on an offer that Maduro himself made towards the end of last year, which is that he would hand himself over if the siege on his country would be lifted. So it seems at least that Maduro was at least partially aware of something like this could happen if he'd indeed made this offer himself and Trump had rejected it. I think that what is actually going on is that Trump jumped on this deal to get himself what appeared to be a victory. That's why he's like putting Maduro in a van and having him be driven through New York with loads of cameras on him. But in actual fact, the rest of the government remains unchanged. The people, the Venezuelan masses, remain armed as per the decision by Maduro. There's no, so far, move against the popular assemblies in the neighborhoods of Caracas and elsewhere, where a lot of actual power does lie in the hands of the Venezuelan working class. So the balance of forces in Venezuela itself remains largely unchanged. The actual structure of the government remains unchanged. There's no apparent defections from the military side. Trump basically slagged off Machado at his press conference, said, no, she doesn't have the support. Nice lady, but terrible. So it seems that what has gone on here is that Trump has jumped on what he saw as an opportunity to extricate himself from a tight spot he got himself into. But no real thought has been done amongst the geniuses of Trump's cabinet as to what they were going to do next. They sort of relied upon the fact that they think that they can just intimidate Rodriguez and the others into line. And this is a cheap way of getting their way in Venezuela. It would seem not, though. It would seem that this has been very poorly thought through by the Trump administration, but that shouldn't be a surprise. We're not dealing with geniuses here. These are people who thought that just by maneuvering their aircraft carriers into place, that the Venezuelan government would just immediately surrender. And when that didn't happen, they didn't know what to do. Now, again, we will have to see exactly what kind of deal was done, because it's clear that some kind of deal was done. But quite what that was and who was involved in it, we don't know for now. We should watch very carefully with regard to not only the actions of the Venezuelan government, but the actions of the Venezuelan masses in the period ahead to discern quite what has gone on here. So Trump, of course, is issuing all kinds of statements saying, you fuck around, you find out. Well, at least Trump's sycophants are. But in reality, so far, Trump doesn't appear to have gained a great deal. Now, it's also true that, even with the sanctions, Chevron was still exporting Venezuelan oil to the United States under license from the U.S. government. So a U.S. company was still doing business there. So what is all of this about? It's a very strange event. And I think it only really makes sense if you consider that everything with regard to the Trump administration is about a show, or at least a large amount of what it does is about a show. It's about the appearance of power. It's about the appearance of omnipotence. Whereas in actual fact, the reality is that it's not only far from omnipotent, but it's the US imperialism actually being defeated in many areas of the world. And this is probably one of the reasons why the liberal side of the political establishment in the United States doesn't trust or like Trump, because they know very well that this is the kind of thing that he's attracted to, and that he surrounds himself with clowns like Pete Hegseth, or just, complete husks of men like Marco Rubio. Now, Rubio, I think, would be more acceptable to the libs in the United States, but he surrounds himself with utter clowns who think that like a media spectacle equals a victory. This is also true to a certain extent of the liberals, but they prefer their media spectacles to be dressed up more. They prefer their production values to be more in line with a Marvel movie rather than a Tom Clancy knockoff, which is what Donald Trump has been providing. So let's take a look at how this develops. Now, it will be also interesting to observe what the Venezuelan government's relationship with Cuba is like, whether the policy there is maintained, whether now President Rodriguez maintains Venezuela's position as an aspirational BRICS member, whether they continue to honor the agreements that they've got with the Russians and the Chinese. Because if the policy remains the same, again, as Marco Rubio said in a TV interview today, then what really has the US gained out of this? Other than like the temporary sugar high of getting Maduro in chains and parading him around New York City. Other than that, what have they gained? If all the policies of the Venezuelan government remain the same, then Trump's got nothing. He's basically just extricated himself from a situation which, in reality, he couldn't win in, and has got to look like some kind of strongman. And he seems to have settled for that. But again, we will have to see. Now, just on the subject of good old Narco Rubio, if you're not familiar with why people use this nickname about him, it's because there was he was staying in his brother-in-law's apartment in, I think it was Miami in the 1980s, when his brother was essentially a villain from a Miami Vice plot, running a cocaine racketeering operation out of his flat. And Marco, of course, just knew nothing about it. So this is the truth, again, as revealed by scholars such as Peter Dale Scott and Aaron Good, that crime, specifically the crime specialized in by the National Crime Syndicate in the United States. Traditionally, of course, this was the Cosa Nostra types and others. This has always been part of US politics and the US establishment. There's always been an organized crime section of this. So that the Secretary of State of the United States would come from a family of cocaine traffickers shouldn't really be a surprise. They've been heavily involved in organized crime the U.S. establishment's been heavily implicated in organized crime and collaborating with it, as have the U.S. intelligence agencies for many, many decades. Organized crime is always part of the political establishment in a lot of the imperialist countries. Again, they don't like to talk about it, and much like the relationship with terrorists and other creations of theirs, which they like to pretend they're against. Again, occasionally, sometimes a big drug trafficker will go down, but more likely, the smarter of them do their deals with the U.S. intelligence services and invest their money through Wall Street into the United States. And that way, of course, you stay on the good side of the U.S. imperium. Now, just going to just pause here by asking you to like and share this stream. And it's good to see that we've got over 700 of you watching at the moment. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the concept of like multipolarity, because we talked about this yesterday. The concept of multipolarity and the US's actions against it. So is the idea of, or the concept of the multipolar world enough to like secure liberation? And the answer, of course, is no. Firstly, because the idea as expressed by some in the multipolar media space that the US under Trump is just going to accept that its globally dominant role as the center of a global neo-colonial operation is over. That is just something which is for the birds. It's a fantasy. They can't accept a relegation to a lower status. It would be very damaging for their business model. And again, no US president could accept that. So the idea that the US is just going to peacefully coexist and do their negotiations with the Russians and the Chinese, again, a joke, not worthy of consideration. Throw that out. And as to the idea of like, well, what does the multipolar world really mean? Well, all it means is that whereas previously the US via neo-colonial rule was able to extend its power via its proxies to all the corners of the globe. Now it's unable to do so in the same way. Now there are alternatives with regard to doing business, China, Russia, etc. And this is causing problems for the US because its entire model was based upon sustaining this neo-colonial model of operations. And this is what's leading to rows within the US ruling class and US political establishment about industrial policy, about rearming, etc., about the model they've used over the last 30 years just simply not working anymore. But it doesn't mean that the oppressed nations of the world and the oppressed peoples of the world automatically have a path to liberation. This is not the case. The disintegration of the power of U.S. imperialism, or at least the lessening of the power of U.S. imperialism, all that means really is that there is a greater degree of space that is available for the oppressed nations of the world to struggle to free themselves. So this is why you get events like, or should we say movements and people emerging like the Alliance of Sahel States, like the government headed by Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, which again seems to have been subjected to a coup attempt by probably the French yesterday that was rapidly defeated, partially by a mass mobilization of the Burkinabe population. So the fact that the Chinese are pushing out the US from its formerly premier trading position, the fact that the Russians have been defeating the NATO militaries inside Ukraine, this all sort of pushes the decline of US power further. But as I said yesterday, the US is going to struggle like hell against this and try very, very hard to gain back its hegemonic position. And it's certainly not going to accept that it's losing this, and will try very hard to disrupt or destroy any government that seeks to truly free itself of neo-colonial domination. Whether they'll be able to do it or not is another question, but that's what they're going to try and do. So the question for us, and we again talked about a little bit about this yesterday, those of us in the imperial core nations, is like, well, what do you do? What do we do now? And the answer comes back to some similar things we've been discussing for many months now, which is that we actually have to get active in a way that challenges the ruling classes of our nation inside the nations, inside the imperial core itself, which hasn't been done really for so many decades that there's barely anybody around who can remember when that was done. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that when liberation movements emerge in the oppressed nations of the world, like in the Sahel and other places, it is our job to offer whatever solidarity we can to them, and to also continually point out that the disintegration of the global neo-colonial system is something which is objectively progressive, because it not only damages imperialism in those countries, it has the potential for damaging imperialism at home as well. If they're no longer able to extract the value that they do at the moment from the of course unequal terms of trade that they have with the masses in the neo-colonial nations, then that's going to generate a crisis domestically as well, as it is in France, because they've lost control of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And that is what is going to ultimately generate a crisis in all of the imperialist powers. The inability that the removal of their ability to exploit the oppressed nations of the world is going to trigger a crisis internally. Now, as far as multipolarism goes, that means it's a progressive point on the way towards other struggles. No, it is not the end point for us, because the idea that there's going to be this nice negotiated outcome between the US, the Chinese, the Russians, maybe the Indians, and a new stable world will emerge, that's not true. What we're going into, and what we're already in, is a period of violent and often dangerous conflict, where nations seek to free themselves and the imperialist powers seek to squash them. And that's the period we're in now, where the move to multipolarity has just opened up new national liberation struggles and new class struggles. Often these are the same struggle, but so the two struggles are wrapped around each other, shall we say. And that's the reality of multipolarism. It's a point on the way towards something else, and it's not the end point. Those out there who think it's the end point are being tremendously naive or mendacious, I would say. So that's the point to emphasize. Multipolarity itself is not the end game. It is a point of reference. It is a sort of, should we say, a stop on the way towards other liberation struggles. Like one, so the period of unmitigated U.S. control, the monopolar moment, the unipolar moment, that passed a while ago, and now we're into the period where you're seeing struggles break out in many areas of the world to start the liberation process. But again, these are struggles which are, of course, dictated by national, regional conditions, and which will look slightly different in each part of the world. Multipolarism just opens up the scope for more struggles, and that's why it is something which is a welcome phase, but it is not the be all and end all. Okay, so let's get to the comments then. Edward asks, how are you and your local comrades trying to organize in Glasgow? Well, stay tuned for that one, Edward. I'll have more on that in future episodes. So, okay, so let's say hello to some of the people in the chat. So hello to Eduardo, Wicked Witch of the Southeast, Edward, Albert Roundtree, Comrade Davy. Let's just do some moderation here. We also have Jay Galt, Petr Nikolov, Irish Partisan, Abtin, Sophia, Walter Keating, Finnish Leica. We got Alan Smith out there in Georgia, and Alan Smith says, is there a shred of evidence Maduro stole the election apart from the opposition just claiming he did? No, there's no evidence. The indictment says that asserts that Maduro stole the election, but they offer no evidence that he did. And the indictment reads, again, just following U.S. State Department policy, that over 50 countries in the world refused to recognize the election, which means far more countries in the world did recognize the election. In fact, it's broadly speaking the same list of countries that back the Ukraine war that refused to recognize Maduro's legitimacy. So that's what we're dealing with here, fundamentally. We're dealing with the same bloc run by the United States, refusing to recognize Maduro's election victory and claiming that he was illegitimate. There's no evidence that the election was actually rigged. In fact, there were observers at the election from what is now termed global South countries who affirmed that it was actually a free and fair election and that the opposition actually lost. And the reason why the opposition keep losing the presidential elections is because their candidates are usually dog shit lunatics who are like Machado in that what they promise is mass privatization and a return to the good old days where the working class and peasantry of Venezuela were ground under the boot heels of the old oligarch class. So why would anybody vote for that, you see? So to conclude, no, there's no evidence that Maduro actually stole the election. There's no evidence the election was rigged. This is just standard bullshitting from the opposition. They offered zero evidence whatsoever at the time. It was just an assertion, and then the entire imperialist bloc just followed along behind them. So thanks to everybody who's tuning in at the moment. We have we have quite a number of you on all platforms. Excellent. So Now, what we have here, we have some more comments coming in. Wicked Witch of the Southeast says Honduras battling out real rigged election interference. Yeah, that's very true. The Trump administration, well, the U.S. state, essentially managed to gain control of the election supervising body inside Honduras, and essentially just declared their guy the winner, is despite the evidence of vast electoral fraud. That's the true face of the US's commitment to democracy. Remember, there's no such thing as democracy. The question is always democracy for whom? Right. What else do we got here? Remember that cleric from the Clash song, I'm So Bored of the USA? It was originally meant to be I'm So Bored with You, but they changed it to I'm So Bored of the USA because it sounded better. Red Chilean says another reason why Maduro keeps winning is because the opposition lost 8 million votes in those who emigrated out of the country. Yeah, the waves of emigration coming out of Venezuela generally tended to be those who hated the government and wanted to get to the United States. So Trump denouncing Venezuelan migration, well, he's denouncing the people who support him, you know? So Walter Keating says, I'm not giving up hope. My guts tell me the US empire has really stepped in it this time. It looks like victory, but there's a catastrophic disaster. Well, time will tell on that one. We'll have to see how it shapes out. I suspect that Trump, in like jumping on what seemed to be a quick win, has actually done more damage to himself than it would first appear. Edward asks, why do you think there was a deal done between the US and Venezuela if the government right now in Venezuela is not bowing down? I don't know. Everything right now is a mess. Well, again, like, you have to ask the question, which is that, and deal with the facts as we have them at the moment. The US was able to insert two helicopters at least into the air. Excuse me. Into the air above Caracas, land near the presidential residence, get into the residence, take Maduro and his wife, and apparently no shots were fired. So, and no, there were no injuries to the US. No air defense missiles were fired, despite the providing to Venezuela by the Russians of plenty of like shoulder-fired air defense missiles, which could easily have shot down those helicopters when they were flying in, which weren't exactly invisible. They're big, hefty-looking things. So that is something which which is a verifiable fact. Like it was taken with apparently minimal opposition, and the question has to be why. Is it just because that the U.S. special forces are unbeatable and that they're so good that they can get around anything and do anything? Well, no, that's not the case. I mean, these people lost a helicopter of Navy SEALs trying to kill bin Laden, who was just sat in a civilian house watching fucking television. Like, they're not the geniuses that like the Tom Clancy fiction portrays them as. So it's clear then that some kind of deal with somebody had been reached. Now, we don't know who exactly within the Venezuelan state did this deal. We don't know if Maduro's in on it, but if he made that offer himself to hand himself over in return for lifting the siege, then maybe he was aware of it. We don't know. Ultimately, though, it certainly seems at the moment that this is not the scenario that the US ultimately wanted. Now, Gonzalo Cabrera asked the Communist Party in Venezuela. Well, there's two communist parties. There was a split in the official Communist Party between those who support the PSUV and those who oppose them. And the official Communist Party in Venezuela still has a sort of patriotic united front with the PSUV. And they've certainly denounced the abduction of Maduro in loud terms. Again, the KKE, Greek Communist Party split from the Venezuelan Communist Party, it basically took a Trotskyite orientation towards the Bolivarian Revolution and started endlessly criticizing it in a way that could only aid imperialism, basically. President Jesus says they just needed to make it a law enforcement action rather than a military strike to get around Congress. That's true. Eduardo says there were 4 choppers and they were shot at and over 40 dead soldiers and civilians. Yes, but my point was no US casualties, as far as we know. If it turns out that there were US casualties, I will have to update my analysis of this. Great Clickbait says US will control oil in Venezuela. As Trump said, Venezuela has the largest reserves and doesn't export as much. US control will massively increase global oil supply, in turn decrease oil prices. Well, again, that would be their ideal scenario. But we don't know as yet if this is going to change anything. Again, like even Rubio didn't seem to know if any actual Venezuelan government policy would change. So it needs to be watched carefully. So we will, keep an eye on that. There's nothing certain yet. Also, there's certain specifics about the quality of Venezuelan crude oil that make it apparently so you have to refine it in a certain way in order that it can be used. Now the Russians were apparently working on that. So we'll see if they stay in place. And the deals they have with the Russians and the Chinese aren't violated. Now, how is Trump, as Red Chilean asks in the chat, how is Trump going to be able to control Venezuela remotely, given that unless he has actually subordinated the Venezuelan government, headed by Vice President and Acting President Rodriguez, then how is he going to control anything? Also, given that the Venezuelan masses are very politicized, have a high degree of class and national consciousness, and are armed, well, even if Trump has managed to subordinate the Venezuelan government and corrupt it, then that doesn't account with the resistance of the masses as well, or the closeness of the masses to the Venezuelan armed forces, which hasn't changed either. So again, there's a whole lot of issues here which Trump hasn't resolved by doing this. He's got like a paper victory, which in actual fact revealed more the weakness of his position and the position of US imperialism than anything else. Right. President Jesus says, what do you think about Vijay Prashad's theory that electronic warfare systems were used off the coast to disable Venezuela's radar system? Well, again, it's certainly possible. The US does apparently has the capability to do that. Now, whether they actually did do that, I don't know. Again, the US always claims that it's got all these systems which are like technologically far in advance of everybody else. Whether they deployed them, I don't know. Certainly, it seems like something they would try and do. But again, I need to look more into it to be able to give you a cogent answer to that question. But I will I'll look at exactly what Prashad said and see if there's any any further information about it. Great Clickbait says multipolar world order is cooked. Time to retire. I wouldn't say it was cooked. I would say like the multipolar world order does exist now. It's like the US still can't win the war in Ukraine. That's why they're trying to preserve the Kiev regime and get to some kind of settlement there. They still can't win they're still looking for another round with Iran, it would seem, though quite how that's going to go, I'm not sure. They were desperately hoping that the current round of protests in Iran could be manipulated in their direction, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So again, like the US's power has been curtailed drastically over the last 20 years. So multipolarity is a fact, but it is just another stage on the road to more struggle for national liberation and more class struggle within each individual country. Pedro Nikolov says, how many attempted coups and assassinations in Venezuela? Maduro being nabbed won't change anything. The revolution will stay on course. Well, let's see. Let's see. Let's hope. Certainly hope that that's the case. Jay Galt says, doubt if that level of EMW, electronic measures, is that tech existed, Ukrainian Air Force wouldn't have been clobbered by Russian air defense. Yes. Or Israelis being able to unable to penetrate Iranian airspace. Yeah. Right. Chris Rogers says, I wish folks would recognize that what flying under the radar means. If you fly under 200 feet under the radar, you don't show up on it. Yes, that's true. But also, like, I mean, they did manage to turn out the lights in Venezuela over in Caracas on the night where Maduro was taken. So there's every possibility that they did manage to sabotage the grid for the period in which they were trying to insert their team. Again, still doesn't explain why not a single shot was fired. Like big helicopters coming in make an awful lot of noise. Like you can hear them approaching from miles away. I used to live when I was a kid in an area where you could, like, there was quite a lot of British and US military flypasts. You could, like, there was a lot of like big transport planes would go past on the way to an RAF base that was used by the US fairly close by. You could see Chinook helicopters flying over the countryside from time to time as well. These make a lot of fucking noise, you know. They make a lot of noise. You can hear them coming for miles and miles away, and so no one heard them coming. No one, like in the Venezuelan military, with like a portable night vision goggles or a portable night vision scope or something, could see them coming. No one in the presidential guard heard them coming. You would assume that the presidential guard for Maduro would have somebody on the roof. So even if they used electronic warfare to turn off the radar system, let's assume they did that. Even if they turned out the lights in Caracas, which apparently they did manage to do, well, that still leaves like portable battery-powered system. That still leaves the human ear and the human eye, which is able to see and hear things. So again, doesn't explain how they managed to pull this off. With minimal casualties on the US side, or no casualties on the US side, if what the Trump administration is saying is to be believed. Now, there's every chance that the Trump administration is lying, and that there'll suddenly be an announcement in like some local newspapers in the United States of tragic death of or injury to a local man who's a good patriot, a member of the armed forces in an undisclosed unit. There's every chance of that, but it doesn't look like that's happened at the moment. So we'll see. We'll see. Let's see. Irish Partisan says, does anybody remember the Chuck Norris movie Delta Force? Talk about reactionary bollocks. Well, that's Chuck's entire career. Like, what was it called? That film he made in the mid-'80s, like Invasion USA, where it's like the Soviet Union and Iran and Cuba like invade the United States. It's kind of like a sort of bargain basement version of Red Dawn, the old film by John Milius, you know. Norris also claims he beat Bruce Lee in a real fight. Well, it's easy to claim that when the guy you're claiming it about has been dead for over 40 years, you know. I doubt it, you know. Right. Wicked Witch of the Southeast says almost all U.S. old money started in the opium trade, including John Kerry's family and the Delanos, for starters. Yes, a lot of fortunes were made out of narcotics in both Britain and the United States. And then it only takes a generation or so for you to wash the money and claim legitimacy, whereas your ancestor was essentially just a drug dealer. Abtin says there was a Tom Clancy 9/11 book that was written several years before the event. I read it in middle school. Interesting. Hadn't seen that one. Haven't read Tom Clancy for many, many years. Always a laugh, though. Sophia says, I wonder if the CIA will restart Air America operations. I don't think they ever gave it up. No, that was never stopped. Edward says, during the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Maduro, a significant portion of his security detail was coldly killed, stated the head of the Ministry of Defense of the Republic, Pedrino Lopez. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see what the reality is. I remain skeptical of all statements at the moment. And again, even if they managed to kill members of the presidential guard, still doesn't quite explain why you managed to get 2 helicopters in there and no one fired on them. No one managed to get like a shot off. Like none of this at the moment. Like there's a whole lot of unanswered questions as to what exactly happened here. And by the way, again, I don't. To emphasize the point, I don't buy the propaganda from the US that their amazing super soldiers are just that good that they could beat anybody. Bear in mind, these guys were mostly used as a death squad, targeting like Afghan peasants and unarmed people in Iraq for like the last 2 decades. They're not fucking, some kind of like immortal supermen, even though that's, of course, how they like to portray themselves. Right. Okay, US has become the axis of evil. Well, always was, Tony. Always was. The true axis of evil, of course, is mainly Britain, the US, the French, and the Germans. That's the real axis of evil. CJ Jackson says Trump may do the same in Nigeria. Well, interesting. I mean, there you've got a literal US puppet in Bola Tinubu. Who has a track record as being a fucking drug dealer in the United States. So, like, quite what they're going to do with him is an interesting question. He's clearly been serving their purposes. Maybe they decided that he's not serving their purposes enough. But again, Nigeria is a big country with a huge working class, and it's a significant risk to try and engage in this kind of outright neo-colonialism, or in this case, more direct colonialism. So, we'll have to see how that goes. I don't think they will. I think they're more going to use Nigeria as a springboard to attack Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, to be honest. And they don't need total control of it to do that. Who's stupid enough to deal with the devil, as Chavez called the US president? Well, lots of people, unfortunately. Clearly, somebody has. So, again, like people that never underestimate 2 things. First of all, there's always somebody who'll go for the money. There's always somebody who'll go to indulge in corruption. So there's that in every system, everywhere. But then also, never underestimate the stupidity of some people. There's always those, this is especially true with social democrats, who think that they've got a really clever way to outwit the imperialists, that no one's thought of this before, that we'll agree to this, we'll give them this, then we'll get that in return. There's always a degree of foolishness in play as well. Edward says, in your opinion, if the USSR was still around with the socialist bloc, what would be the state of global capitalism in Western states closest revolution? Well, given that the collapse of the USSR and the socialist bloc enabled the imperialists to get out of a hole that they were disappearing into. They were in significant trouble, which they weren't able to get out of just by increasing the rate of exploitation of the domestic working class. This is part of the reason why they increased their level of aggression against the Soviet Union, the people's democracies, and Yugoslavia in the 1980s, and relentlessly pushed for these nations to be destroyed. And in the end, thanks to internal treachery and counter-revolution, they succeeded far beyond what they would have expected. Now, the question of if the Soviet Union and the people's democracies had survived, even in revisionist format, then what would have happened? Well, the boost that the US imperialist bloc got by being able to asset strip so many formerly socialist countries in the 1990s would not have occurred. Now, you would still have got things like the dot-com boom, because the internet was well in the works by then, But the good years of the 1990s would not have been anything like as good for US imperialism if the socialist bloc remained intact. So there's every chance that even with a revisionist leadership in the USSR, there would still the crisis in the West would have been more severe and long lasting. The crash of 2008 would probably have happened a bit earlier. Now, and also the US aggression against Iraq, for instance, and other countries would have been a lot more difficult to pull off with a strong Soviet Union and socialist bloc in place. The only reason that idea could even go ahead was because the socialist bloc didn't exist anymore, and that the nations that survived either had no interest in seriously opposing the US, that was China under the Jiang Zemin leadership, or were too weak to and were ruled by people who had no real interest in challenging them either, such as the Russian Federation. You have a socialist bloc, again, even one run by revisionists in the 1990s and 2000s. That whole project for a new American century would have not been a viable prospect at all. And so it would have plunged the imperialist world into a greater crisis much sooner than actually happened. And the crisis would have been much deeper. So now, whether that would have automatically translated into an increased chances of revolution in the West would have depended upon a lot of subjective and objective factors related to the internal class struggles in those countries. But it would have made the crisis facing imperialism considerably worse, yes. All right, so let's scroll through some more comments here. Charlie97 says, can you do an entire episode to deconstruct the image of military supremacy in the West? Despite it being narratives, it affects morale in other countries to fear a resistance like Haiti. That's a good point. I'll make a note of that for a future episode. Irish Partisan says, Chuck Norris starred in the sway of reactionary movies in the 80s, like Missing in Action series, Invasion USA, Delta Force, all made by Cannon, an Israeli-based film company. Yes, the Cannon Group headed by Menachem Golan, I believe it was. Who was a Zionist Israeli citizen. They made an awful lot of violent, reactionary movies. They took over the Death Wish series, the most notorious of them being Death Wish 3, which is basically Michael Winner and Charles Bronson's Death Squad fantasies about shooting racial minorities in the United States. Now the question of what role did that play in the propaganda system? I think it's clear. It's this stuff is made because it's good propaganda, and ultimately didn't help the Cannon Group. They went out of business because it turns out that Menachem Golan was a very bad businessman. There you go. Let's go and have a look here. Charlie 97 continues their comment saying, like the Haiti coup where the assassins claimed to be DEA and that made the Presidential Guard mostly surrender without resistance. Yeah, the image of the U.S. forces as omnipotent and representing this enormous power which cannot possibly be challenged. Yeah, that is more based on bullshit propaganda than reality. Yeah, the US can still kill a lot of people. Let's not underestimate it. But again, bear in mind Mao's paper tiger comment. But it takes a certain kind of politics, organization, and consciousness that needs to be encouraged in order to see that and understand it properly, to understand the limits of US power. So maybe a series on the limits of US power would be a good. Will Marxism, Human Relations, and Debunking Anti-Communist Myths series come back? Yeah, new year, new slate of shows. I'm going to have to work out exactly what we're putting on the air at any given time, but expect an announcement on that fairly soon. Edward says 1926 is the closest Great Britain has ever been to socialist revolution. Sadly, it's been downhill ever since. That was the closest. I mean, that's exactly why the TUC shut it down. Unfortunately, the CPGB, Communist Party of Great Britain, was too small to be influential enough on that movement. But it was that was the moment when it could have happened. Moment when it could have happened. There were other moments where a revolutionary line could have been pushed, like I would say between about 67 and 74. Certainly, even in the later 70s, there was a mood amongst the most class conscious, advanced part of the working class that could see that there was an assault coming on them from the ruling class and wanted to do something about it. Unfortunately, the organization which should have benefited from that, if they'd been able to take a revolutionary line, the Communist Party of Great Britain, was a completely bankrupt, compromised mess run by dogmatic revisionists who wanted to just collaborate with the Labour Party. And they adopted the British road to socialism again, which committed the party to a reformist practice even before Stalin died. This is 1951. And now the real crime there isn't that they thought that at some point that they could pursue socialist change through parliament. You could make that mistake for a while in the reform period after World War II. It's still a mistake, but you could rectify it. The real problem with it was that it became a dogmatic obsession. Like it is the only policy, it's the only strategy that the CPGB and its successor organization, the CPB, have ever pursued since then. They did not change that analysis, even when the working class came under assault from the ruling class, even when it became clear that the ruling class was considering military coups in Britain, even when the Thatcher government went gloves off with the trade union movement, or certainly proceeded to destroy the most militant unions. The Communist Party leadership kept saying, vote Labour and push them left, vote Labour and push them left. Well, how did that work out? It ended up destroying the Communist Party of Great Britain, to be completely honest. And then it compromised fatally its successor organization. So again, there were moments in British history where there could have been a revolution, or could have been at least a move towards a more revolutionary situation. But when that happened, the Communist Party in the first instance in 1926 was too small, and in the second instance had already been like eroded to the point of becoming just a social democratic operation, which is what happened in the 60s and the 70s. Right. Sonyama5246 says, where are all these people praising Russia? Wake up, people. What's the second language in Israel? Russian. Well, what's the first language? Well, it's Hebrew and English. Well, this is fairly easy to explain. I mean, we've talked about this over and over again. The Russians are engaged in a real war with the entirety of NATO in Ukraine. The Russian bourgeois system contains within it some anti-imperialist elements, some pro-Zionist elements that have been there since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The relationship between the Russian state and Israel is one that is nowhere, which is not something which is pleasing to us, but that doesn't change the reality of the Russians engaging in a fight that ultimately weakens NATO and the USA. So you need to be able to analyze things on multiple different levels here. This is not a matter of like adopting like a uniform, like pro-Putin position and saying everything the Russian government does is fucking amazing, because it's not. And you need to be able to analyze these different elements inside the Russian system to make sense of it. And it's not also about saying that, oh, Russia's just in it with in a hidden conspiracy with the US, because that isn't true either. So learn to think on several different levels. I see we've also got the usual collection of fucking morons in the chat who keep saying that everybody's a secret Jew. So like, you can just fuck off. Edward says Kirill Dmitriev speaks favorably of Israel because the pro-Zionist equal the compradors. Yeah, Russian comprador bourgeoisie, many of them are pro-Zionist. Always, they always were. Many of them are also anti-Semitic. But then again, that's a partnership that's been in place for over 100 years. Were Soviet movies as violent as Western movies? It seems like bourgeois culture is obsessed with violence. There is violence in Soviet World War II movies. I mean, the big one, like the Liberation Quintet, is. I mean, there's a lot of violence in that. The was it as violent as like comparable American and British World War II movies of the time? I'd say it's about the same level. I mean, bear in mind, like Western movies before the 70s used to be a lot less violent and a lot less graphic than they are now. They became more graphic as like time went on through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Till now, like you get like a lot of absurdly graphic violence in that. But Soviet war movies did have violence in them, undoubtedly. I think Klimov's Come and See crossed a lot of lines in that, and Klimov later, rapidly after that was released, became like one of Gorbachev's guys importing like Western cinematic atrocities into the USSR. You know, right? Okay, so. Going to draw things to a close for this evening. I'll be back with you again tomorrow with an edition of the Decline and Fall show, where we will again be looking at what's gone on with regard to Venezuela and bringing you the latest from there. So keep an eye out for that. We will return with more shows in later on in the week on the Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao Institute channel. I will announce like what the programming schedule for the upcoming few months will be on Patreon pretty soon. So do keep an eye out for that. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and on Substack and on Buy Me a Coffee. Your support makes this work possible. Thanks to everybody who's watched today. Be sure to subscribe to the various different platforms you're watching on. And I will be back with you again tomorrow for Decline and Fall. But until then, thank you for watching. And here's your video outro.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы.
Продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
С неба милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.